So the biggest question here is how and when can we get back to business in America? Let's say hello and good morning to Representative Andy Biggs. He's on KCMO Talk Radio 710 AM, 103.7 FM out of Arizona. Also the leader in the House for the Freedom Caucus. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us here in Kansas City. As we sit here today on April 15th, what do you think the conversation needs to be about how we can get back to some normalcy here?
Well, I think you have to approach it on a couple of fronts. You have to talk about economic recovery, reopening the businesses that make this country go, the small businesses, the men and women who are sole proprietors. I think that's the one thing. I think the second thing you have to be talking about, too, is how do you rein in some of the tyrannical enforcement that we're seeing around the country by various governors and mayors and who basically have lost sight of what constitutes our basic fundamental rights and liberties in this country.
So, Congressman, how do you differentiate between, what some of these governors are doing that's, appropriate, looking out for public safety, and what is crossing the line? I mean, in your opinion and everything that you've studied and where is that line? How should we, draw it based on what is going on?
Well, once government steps away from advising, providing guidelines, providing support, providing that kind of counsel, and moves into enforcement that directly violates, say, the First Amendment. So you have people who want to worship; they're willing to go in their cars and worship, and you've got governors or mayors who are saying, "Look, you can't even go through drive-through." Even though you can go through a drive-through liquor store, you can't go through the drive-through worship. When you see this type of enforcement against fundamental constitutionally recognized rights, I think that's probably where I start looking into that you've crossed the line. I think that's really the right line.
Being joined by Arizona Congressman Andy Biggs on KCMO Talk Radio, the House Freedom Caucus leader. So, Congressman, you wrote a very interesting op-ed in the Washington Examiner about whether or not Dr. Fauci, in your opinion, is helping or hurting. Obviously his medical expertise is bar none, but when you do look at the economic impact, how do you identify how much we are helping versus how much we could be hurting?
Well, you have to look at that, and Fauci himself said that he didn't include in any of his analysis societal, economic, social problems that were going to occur because of his policies. He was focused on one thing only, and I get that. That's his job. But part of his job and part of the other people around him have to look and say, well, we know that if you force basically 20 to 25, some estimates as high as 30 million people to be unemployed, and you also contract your GDP, and you also extend your structural deficit for this year alone to well over $4 trillion, so you jump your debt. That has a tremendous impact on the economic viability of the country. The foundation gets rocked and shaken, and maybe you put yourself into a recession, perhaps a depression, and that has its own set of health problems as people can't afford to get the care they need. You see rural hospitals and some even in cities will close because they can't get paid for their services. So you actually might exacerbate the general overall health system of your country as well. And you have to take into account everything from suicides, domestic violence, child abuse, increased alcoholism, increased use of drugs. You have to take that into account and at some point say, look, we've crossed a line on those social pathologies due to the economic situation and the policies.
Being joined by Congressman Andy Biggs out of Arizona. He is the House Freedom Caucus leader. So, Congressman, as we look at what is next here, there's been a push-pull between how much power the president should have over states and what they do versus what the governors should do. Seems to me it's still a call by the governors. Now, we all hope they do what is right for their states. How do you think this relationship between the feds and the states and the governors should go moving forward?
Well, I agree with you, Pete. It's the governors who should make the calls on how you open up your state and when you should do it, and let the people there decide whether they view that happily or not through the electoral process or what other process they have. But what you really raised there is what I view as a critical issue that we've had upside down for many decades, and that is everybody's going to the federal government for everything. The federal government is backstopping, and I'm not saying it's inappropriate in this case, but as we do so, the federal government imposes mandates upon the states. They cause their own set of problems with the states, and you see centralization happening right now, accretion of power to the center, and those are things that really are not supposed to happen in the United States of America, because the states are supposed to be basically sovereign over so much of this stuff, and that's really what you have to make the determination. And I see in all of these things in the last 40, 50 years, longer even, this move to centralize to the feds.
Mm-hmm. Congressman, as someone who is obviously the House leader of the Freedom Caucus, you I'm sure are cringing at the amount of money we have spent here the past few weeks. I get this is not a traditional bailout recession. I mean, the government basically shut people and businesses down. So this is different than, let's say what happened in 2008, 2009. But it's got to make you cringe. I know it makes a lot of us cringe. What do we do to try to just start? And it's not going to happen today. It's not going to happen probably anytime in the next 6 to 12 months. But how do we start digging out from under this mountain of death?
Well, you have to elect. I'm just going to be totally candid. You got to elect people to go to Washington, D.C. who are willing to make hard decisions and actually produce a budget. And once you produce a budget, you have to try to make it balanced. We don't have either of that in Congress right now. We've got people who haven't done anything. So Pelosi inserted probably $1 trillion worth of pork in that last spending bill. Everything, as some of the famous things, Peace Corps gets $88 million, et cetera. You just go down it until you get people who are willing to make that choice. And the American people understand the ramifications of moving to well over 100% of debt to GDP ratio. You're not going to elect people who will do that. But that's the first step.
Well, he is the House Freedom Caucus leader, Representative Andy Biggs out of Arizona, joining us on KCMO. Congressman, thank you so much for a few minutes here in Kansas City. Really appreciate your perspective.